The Biden-Harris administration put together so far, well, I guess it's beyond so far, the most diverse cabinet in history. And even though there are more diverse voices in national offices than ever before, will traditionally underserved groups be heard? We're now joined by the leaders of 3 diverse Native and Indigenous communities in the United States. Dalee, Sambo, Dorough, am I getting that right? Dorough, yes. A native Inuit from Alaska is the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the ICC. It represents approximately 180,000 Inuit in the Arctic, including Alaska. Fascinating. I can't wait to connect. Hailama Farden is the president of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, the oldest Hawaiian community-based advocacy movement that works for the welfare of Native Hawaiians. And Dr. Alicia Mousseau is the recently elected vice president of the Oglala, Lakota Sioux tribe of South Dakota. She's focused on bringing health equity, research, programming, and awareness to tribal communities. Really so grateful to all of you. Folks, I've been sitting in this chair today, kind of stuck here for hours and hours and hours. Every once I've got my computer here popping up, and I'm on, the Biden's media team, and it's been popping all day with new executive orders from President Biden on basically saying we need to engage and recognize and really take seriously engagement with tribal councils. We need to remove any element of discrimination of Asians and Pacific Islanders. And so we're right in that space that we're talking about today, and stuff is unfolding as we talk about it. So let me just start out with Alicia for a moment and say, is this promising for you, but is basically getting people on the cabinet and putting out executive orders enough? What is the meat that you want to see in terms of different moves from this administration?
Yeah, so, we've been waiting, right? Since the beginning. We're the first peoples of this nation. And so we've been waiting for these conversations. And we hear honor the treaties, and we're doing more land acknowledgements now. But, how about we honor the people and do acknowledgements of the people? So that's, we're waiting, we're excited, and we're ready to have those conversations.
Are you sensing among the people that you represent, and you represent diversity and across a lot of areas, but do you sense that there's a sense of change, that this is an inflection point?
We've been waiting. I'll just keep saying that, for the conversations, for the change. We do the work here in our communities and for our people as much as we can. We do, and everyone is doing the best they can with what they have right now, especially given the pandemic. But some of these things that the pandemic has opened up and shown us in our systems, including the systemic racism things, we've felt that since the beginning. These systems were not made for us and by us, and we have been trying to make do with them as best we can since people came to this country. We've been here. And so we've been trying to work with them and make them more user-friendly for us, given our sovereignty and our ability to do that. But I'm excited to see it happen on a national level, to be honest.
Thank you for that. Dalee, Arctic Indigenous peoples, this is an arena of much stress right now. There's climate change. There are issues about not having engagement, not being out there. And I'm just interested in how you see this moment. And what do you think, there's a lot of folks listening right now, what do you think we need to hear that we're not hearing? What are the blind spots when it comes to working with the community and working on, I hate this calling your community, working on the issue of ignoring people, of bigotry, of racism, of not seeing people that are there?
Thank you for the question. I think that Alicia is right, that many of these issues have been chronic and persistent for Indigenous peoples across North America, the Pacific, and elsewhere. And from the Arctic region, I think that the initial signals of this new administration, the Biden administration, are very hopeful that there is some light on the horizon, especially when you consider the recent appointments, especially Deb Haaland as the Secretary of Interior. This is a sign of hope. But back to what Alicia said, the issues that we've been facing since first contact have been chronic and persistent. And for the Arctic region, you are dead on. The impacts of climate change are dramatic and they're significant, and they're contributing to many interrelated conditions for our communities. Also, Alicia's reference to the pandemic, I think that we have seen the reveal of some of these chronic issues, especially in the Arctic, where many of our communities are remote, rural, coastal communities where we have faced an infrastructure deficit for decades. And this was prior to the pandemic.
Right.
They've been much more acute in the pandemic. If we think about matters like potable water, if we think about matters like actual healthcare facilities, you know, when you hold that up against the backdrop of a global pandemic, and you expect people to make do with what they have, many across America need to understand that what our communities don't have is the basic infrastructure to respond to these issues. And on your point about climate change, I think that it is absolutely imperative that the rest of the nation, as well as the global community, understand the dramatic impacts of climate change upon our people who have been reliant upon the sea ice and the marine environment and all of the different the realization of all of the different cascading impacts upon our communities, including food insecurity. So there are a host of different issues facing Arctic Indigenous peoples, a host of different issues facing Inuit communities, and that light on the horizon, I hope that our communities see the concrete results through this administration to close some of these gaps, and also engage directly with us as to what our priorities are and our solutions are to the challenges that we continue to face.
I really appreciate that. I want to share. I'm also hopeful in Deb Haaland's appointment as Secretary of the Interior. I had the privilege of interviewing her a few weeks ago, right on this show, about some of these same issues. And I always think that there's this interesting potential gap, and you'll just have to excuse me. There's this Japanese term called tatemai and hone. Tatemai is the surface, hone is the reality, the deep core, and there could be a big difference. But the question is, when you see somebody appointed as, can they deliver? And I'm very hopeful that she really gets the agenda that needs to be put in place on all of these, and we'll see. But Hailama, I cannot remember a time. I have been very interested in Hawaii for so long, but I was also aware that there is this a kind of internal discrimination, if you will, at least that's the way I put it, a neglect of native Hawaiians in Hawaii. And I know you've been working on that, on housing, on opportunity, on businesses across the board. I'm a big fan of what you've been trying to do. I guess I would ask you a question of, one, why has it been so hard? Why is this problem, which has been there for so long, so hard to fix? And two, what do you want America to hear? What do you want the Biden administration to hear?
Before I begin, I'd like to thank you. And he hano keia ku'uno ana me olua, Dr. Dorough, Dr. Mousseau. It is my honor to serve here today with you all. And I thank you. Just quickly, because I know our time is short, I could spend hours talking about a plight of Native Hawaiian people. I could spend hours and tell you how poorly we have been serviced and served. And I know that you can find that information. America, you can find that information. And I'll be always willing to engage with any of you on this. We had a kingdom. We are a very successful kingdom established by King Kamehameha I. And on top of that, we established one of, if not the first, Department of Education in the world. And our king declared this would be a literate nation back in the 1830s and 40s. We had the first newspaper west of the Rockies, actually, first school west of the Rockies, first newspaper west of the Missouri, and even farther 1 million leaves of newspaper continue, and they're all written in Hawaiian. And so when I think about the plight of the Native Hawaiians, which in many cases are similar to our Alaska Natives, as well as our First People, First Nations folks in the United States, you know, there are similarities. We have some others too. But yes, Governor Hollis earlier spoke of the multidimensional tragedy in its connection to COVID. I'll tell you that is one of the dimensions of the tragedies and pilikia or problems that we face as Native Hawaiians. So I'd rather spend some time to say, what are we going to do? I think we have a great opportunity here. I too support President Biden's nomination to Representative Holland, and that I have very high hopes that something will be happening. Imagine, why did it take so long for a Native person to be nominated and we're hoping to be selected? On top of that, we need to be together, the Native Indigenous people of what is now the United States of America. We need to work together. We need to connect with each other. We probably need to be more civically engaged. We need to find ways to address some of the major areas, like you said, education, native health and well-being, and housing. Great opportunities in the civic level, in the government level, economic level especially. Why not lift our people up? And you know what's good about putting our people up there in offices and serving is that our people are very inclusive. We will always include and not exclude. That's not what we were taught. And I know our colleagues here would agree to that. So that would be my answer. Let's start working together and let's draft legislation and congressional acts or laws. Let's start working as a people together, bringing in all walks of life, all races that are here, and indigenous and you call them, let's say Native folks throughout the world, and bring us together, because we'll help the world, we'll heal the world.
That's wonderful. Let me ask the three of you, starting with Alicia. I don't know how this is going to come out. Sometimes I ask questions, I don't know where they're going to go, but I guess, I've done so many events and editorial moments on things like clinical trials in cancer, or listening to folks about COVID. Tomorrow I'm interviewing Anthony Fauci about how the vaccine rollout's going out, how trials and involvement. And one of the things you look at about COVID, the impact on communities of color, certain communities, a lot of it is oriented around income and race. But then when you kind of look at it and you really get into it, there's an absence of social trust. There's a fear that somehow in some communities that science is there. And the way around that is communications. It's ambassadors. It's embracing people that the indigenous, Inuit community would trust, or the, indigenous Native American community would trust, or the Asian Pacific Islander community would trust. And I guess my friendly critique of the government right now is I'm not sure those ambassadors are there. So let me just ask each of you, what would you do if you were in charge to create a greater bridge of social trust? So when it came to cancer, when it came to dealing with climate change, when it came to deal with, COVID stuff, when it came to, various other, programs and policies out there, that there was less skepticism and more trust. I don't know if that's an unfair question, Alicia, but I'm going to start with you.
I think having your own people be the scientists, be the experts, that definitely helps to build the trust. I'm a scientist by training as well, and so I can help to convey some of those messages to our community. But I also know our community we have traditional, people who know our traditional ways, and they may not have a PhD from a university, but they have a PhD in traditional knowledge in our community, in our culture, and our history, and so they're just as important. So I think it's also creating that mutual respect and understanding of education and knowledge, and how can we all use that to help our community understand some of those Western ways of knowing as well, and also having the Western ways of knowing understand our traditional ways of knowing and not make them two separate things, because you know, there are a lot of parallels you can make in both of those things, and medicines and you know, treatments and things like that. It just takes that time of creating that understanding and building those bridges, like you said, from our community ways of knowing and traditional ways of knowing and those Western ways of knowing, and also creating that pipeline for our students and our community members to get those degrees and bring that knowledge back and build that base for them to come back in jobs and careers in our communities, specifically in our communities.
Thank you for that. I love the scaffolding that you just gave this. But Dalee?
Yeah. I think that what you've hit on in terms of trust and respect and recognition, that this is at the core of all of the future dialogues that we need to have to get to the point that Hailama has outlined in terms of working together. And Alicia's comments just now about the importance of Indigenous knowledge. And really it comes to real trust, real respect, real recognition, the genuine sentiment of that, the embrace of Indigenous peoples through dialogue and genuine outreach and discussion of the issues that face our communities. And from my point of view, much of this does really come back to recognizing and respecting Indigenous peoples and their values, their practices, their customs, their institutions, everything about us as distinct peoples who have a desire to maintain our cultural identity and everything that makes up our cultural identity. There's so much work to do in every area, whether it's health and healthcare, whether it's the dealing with the impacts of climate change, whether it is in relation to education, or our ability to define and determine our own priorities for our development within our communities, whether it's economic development, social development, cultural development, spiritual development, whatever it happens to be. And I guess to a large extent, I'm really saying the full recognition of and respect for our right of self-determination as distinct people so that we can occupy that political and intellectual space and make the extraordinary contributions that we can make as Indigenous peoples. I really appreciate what Alicia has said about Indigenous knowledge and the importance of Indigenous knowledge. If we're going to tackle these issues within our communities, our leadership, our knowledge holders, and others have to be brought to the table in a meaningful, effective, and to a large degree, an urgent fashion in order for us to begin those dialogues and make the contributions that we can. I think that your earlier question, which I failed to respond to in terms of discrimination and the issue of equality, the rest of the world community needs to recognize that in order to gain equality in relation to Indigenous peoples, whether they're Inuit throughout Chakaka, Alaska, Canada, or Greenland, or Haudenosaunee, or Native Hawaiian people, is to really embrace everything about us, including and specifically our right of self-determination. And I guess that's what I think is very hopeful in terms of Deb Haaland, as well as the others that she may identify to assist her in our future work. But direct outreach and direct engagement and understanding that equality means something different in the Indigenous context.
Well, and thank you for that. And Hailama, I want to, ask you to just, if we can answer that question of, social trust, but just tack on there. What is going to be the real dividing line in terms of how you see the Biden administration, which has come in, getting it right or getting it wrong? So I hate to put the pressure on you. This is our last word, but I'm putting it on you. So.
a lot of pressure. We need to be at the table. I think, first of all, when the rest of the Western world was fearing sea monsters and that they'd fall off the side, our peoples were sailing the Pacific. We were. And not fearful, we knew that we were guided. And on top of that, I would say we carried that excellence all the way until 1893, when there was the illegal armed invasion of Hawaii by the United States Marines and some other folks here. And folks read about it. Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen tells the story of what happened to Hawaii. People don't know. On top of that, we have to seize the opportunities. I spoke already about health and well-being of our people. I spent this morning, because I ended last night talking to an elder about how his brother doesn't have access to a computer and thus not even able to connect to a sign-on registration. And when he calls the number that's provided, the number's always busy. So I spent the morning speaking to one of our doctors, our Native Hawaiian doctors. So what can we do? And we're trying to figure out some ways of getting our people easy accessibility. We spent much of the early 1900s being told, be good Americans and don't disrespect, don't make waves. Well, it's time for us to make waves. And we don't have to be rude about it. We've never been. It's time for us to take our ownership of our responsibility where we were as a people and stand. I represent 60 clubs from Hawaii all the way to Washington, D.C. And our organization has been doing political work. We have been doing cultural work and spiritual. I love the ideas brought out by Dr. Dorough. And I would like to pledge to work with both of you as well as our other colleagues to continue lifting our peoples. And because when we are doing well, the world will do well. I continue to promise that. So get us into positions. Now, I also will say as a last caveat, you know, I represent the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. We have many definite, wonderful Native Hawaiian leaders that should be connecting with you, as well as the perspective. There's a divided perspective. One is that some folks are very okay with being United States citizens, and there's some folks who are saying the kingdom has never been surrendered. And you know, officially at the federal level, we are not a part of the 574 federally recognized tribes. We are not a recognized people in the United States. In other words, I don't exist, so maybe I should have been on this show. But
you should definitely be
no
on
one
this
has to
show.
tell me from a Western perspective I don't exist, because I'm here and I exist and we do too. And we're here to work together.
Well, listen, I'm so grateful to all of you, and I want to apologize for something. You know, this is our first conversation that I know, and I just want to say thank you for coming on, and you know, let's continue the conversation. We don't always have to talk about this particularly. What I find interesting, and particularly listening to Dalee, listening to our scientist Alicia, there are lots of other issues. You know, I don't want to typecast anybody, and I want to, you know, have you back so we can continue this conversation and not just do it today and say, okay, you know, let's do it. So let's make a commitment that we can all continue this conversation down the road on a lot of other fronts. I'm very honored that you were here today. So, Hailama Farden, President of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, Alicia Mousseau, Vice President of the Oglala Lakota Sioux Tribe, and Dalee Sambo Dorough, please excuse me for my mispronunciations, International Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. I really appreciate your time and being here. Thank you so much.
Plianak.